Shalom, shalom with everyone watching. This is Rabbi Moshe Otero, Ways of Israel. Hopefully you had a wonderful weekend, and we definitely had one here. Just want to continue with our series of Sefer Ikkarim. We're now in book number 2 of Rabbi Yosef Albo. He was an incredible rabbi and a leader of his people, of his community. And the reason we're looking at him and reviewing his Sefer is mainly because he was during that period of time in Jewish Jewry, where he was in Spain and he was involved with obviously the conversation that he had to deal with the Christian community and the persecution that arose from there to the Jewish community in the Spanish Jewry or Sepharad. So we're going to take a look at his Sefer as we continue book number 2, which is of great interest to many of you who have been watching, and that's the reason why we're moving forward. In his Ma'amar number 2, which is book 2, introduction, he begins to explain the first principle, the existence of God, and derived principles based upon it, following from it, and everyone professing a religion should believe. As we said, he says in the first book, and the secondary principle, which are based upon the existence of God, are 4: unity, incorporeality, independence of time, freedom from defect. In order that the derivative principles may be made clear, we must first explain the fundamental principles from which they are derived, namely the existence of God. Then we shall explain the derived principle one by one, that we may know how many they are. Before doing this, however, I shall preface an observation which is essential for everyone who reads this book. He's referring to his own book, Sefer Ikkarim, book 2. Observation. The reader of this book must bear in mind that there are many statements made in certain parts of this book representing not the true view, but the view of persons quoted, while in other parts of the book statements are made in accordance with the true view, or expressions are used in one place with one meaning and another place with a different meaning altogether. Maimonides does this, and often in the guides of the perplexed. Thus, in the 3rd chapter of his first part, he says that the meaning of the biblical expression, "in the similitude of the Lord does he behold," quote unquote, is that he comprehends the true essence of God, whereas in the 37th chapter he writes that the expression, quote, "but my face shall not be seen," means my real essence is that it cannot be comprehended. And he calls attention to this in the 54th chapter in other passages of the first part. Example, that God's real essence cannot be understood by anyone else. For this reason, the reader of the book must be careful and not to be hasty to criticize the words of the author. He's referring to himself, Rabbi Albo, until he becomes familiar with the style and method of the book and has read all of it as it's stated and said on the topic in question. In other parts of the book, for sometimes the premise is left out in given place because it seems obvious, or because it's explained elsewhere, or the omission is intentional in order to conceal the idea of the reader from the reader, whereas the latter thinks that the author has made a mistake and hastens to criticize him and thinks he's a fool or an ignoramus. We find frequent examples of this logical argument that if one were to say every man ought to know his creator because every rational being ought to know his creator, a person might object to arguments as fallacious, because it does not say that man is a rational being. And as long as the minor premise of the syllogism is not given, the point at issue cannot be proved. This is true, but logicians know that a speaker or an author frequently suppresses the minor premises, as when one says, every man is a sensitive being because every animal is a sensitive being. Every minor premise, every man is an animal, is suppressed, and without it, the thing desired is not proved. But one should not therefore be called a fool or an ignoramus. For this reason, the reader of the book must not be too hasty to criticize as things occurs to him at first sight, but he must bear in mind that the author was not a light-minded person who failed to comprehend after long study that occurred to the reader's first sight. The reader should rather suspect of his own understanding to say himself that it is impossible that the author should have made such an obvious mistake. He should rather ascribe the error to his own thinking and study carefully the words of the author until the real meaning becomes very clear to him. For the author is often engrossed in profound theological problems that he does not think it's necessary to explain a certain matter at length. This matter, it's hard for the reader to understand. The reader must be very careful in this matter, and he will be in the position of those who criticize the law of Moses on the grounds that it permits the profanation of the holy name. For it says, "And thou shalt profane the name of thy God," or that it forbids one to do good to his enemy. For it says, "If thou see that the ass of him that hateth thee is under his burden, thou shalt refrain from helping him." The fault is their own, because they do not take pains to understand the rules of language or to read what is said in another place, which may serve as a commentary on the passage in question. For example, "And ye shall not profane my holy name," and many other places similar. So let's go right into the first chapter. The term existence, which is applied to all existing things, says Rabbi Albo, is a subject of dispute among philosophers, whether it denotes an accident of existing things or whether it is something essential. However, the term existence, as applied to God, cannot denote an accident, because God is not a receptive of accidents, as we shall explain, nor can he be an essential element added to the God of quiddity. For then God's essence would be composed of two things, which is impossible, as we shall see. It follows, therefore, that the term existence, when applied to God, denotes nothing else but his quiddity. But his quiddity is absolutely unknown, as Maimonides explains, for he says that this is what Moses desired to know when he said to God, "Show me, I pray thee, thy glory." And the answer came to him, "Thou cannot see my face, for man shall not see me and live." The rabbis in the Sefer, commenting on this, says, "Not even the angels who are living beings." The meaning is that his quiddity is known to none besides him. It follows, therefore, that his existence also is absolutely unknown, even to the angels. This being so, one may ask, how can a principle of divine law, which cannot be comprehended except God himself, and the answer is that the existence of God is not a principle of the Torah from the side which is impossible of comprehension, namely from the side of God's quiddity, but from the side which is possible of comprehension, namely from a consideration that all existing things are due to his influence, and that he is their cause, is their maker. And from that point of view, we can estimate God's excellence as the one who made existing things to be with extreme perfection and splendor. Now, from this aspect, one may speak of God and estimate his excellence, but we cannot speak of God's essence because it is altogether ineffable. David alludes to this in his Psalms beginning, "Bless the Lord, O my soul." Alluding to the first aspect, he says, "O Lord my God, thou art very great," etc. An example from the side of thy quiddity. "Thou art very great, so that man cannot speak about thee, and with all this thou art clothed with glory and majesty." And from that side concerning which is possible to speak about thee, namely from the visible activities which comes from thee, they show the glory in thy majesty. Therefore he describes in the sequel the creation which comes from God, in which point to God's excellence and perfection, by which perfection which is visible in them. The excellence of the artificer can be seen in his work in two ways. It may show that he has made a wonderful piece of work out of the excellent materials, and everybody can see them You can see them that they are excellent piece of work which was made by an excellent accomplished workman. For example, if one sees a beautiful vessel made of gold and precious stones, these vessels no doubt point to the great excellence of him who made them. Or the artificer made beautiful vessels with fine engravings out of inferior material. As goldsmith, for example, made beautiful vessels with his beautiful engravings out of iron. Thus, surely shows the artificer's great skill and perfection, since he was able to make the beautiful figures and engravings on iron, which is an unyielding material that resists the work of the engraver. Surely he can do wonderful works on more promising materials. So Aristotle, in the 11th book of his work on animals, criticized the ancient scientists who refused to treat the matter, or treat nature of the inferior animals arising from putrefaction, and studied only those born of the union of male-female. Aristotle says that there is more reason for studying the inferior animals produced by putrefaction than others, not because the animals themselves, for they are very lowly and composed with a very inferior material, but being produced from putrefaction, but by reason, the divine power contained in them. For it shows the excellence and perfection of the producer, who infused the power of life into such inferior materials, so that from putrefaction and without union of male-female, there arise an animal being similar to that which is born of union of male and female. It thus redounds to credit of the artificer. Similarly, David praised God in both ways, because of the creation of both kinds which emanates from him. Referring to the first kind, he says, "Who covereth thyself with the light as with the garment?" This alludes to the creation of the world of the separate intelligences, which are called light, and we shall see when we speak of the harmonious use of the word light. Then he alludes to the world of the spheres when he says, "Who stretches out the heavens like a curtain." Then he describes the enduring and great and awesome creation which are visible to all, like light and like the heavens and the dry land and the creation upon earth. He describes also the visible order imposed by God in perfections upon the works of creation, so that animal beings may live and endure. Who sendeth forth springs into valley. They run between the mountains. They give drinks to every beast of the field. Then he speaks of the renewal of the moon every month, and the order of the day and the night, which is the cause of continued existence of the sublunar world, and all the animals according to their different degrees, pointing to the wisdom and excellence of the creation and the Creator, in particular, who appointed the moon for seasons, the sun to knoweth his going down. And this is the cause of day and night, for the maintenance of existing things, and the appearance of the land, and the existence of the other awesome creation. After having completed the praise of God by reason of the great important creation, he recounts his praises from the other side, namely from the aspects of the inferior creation produced by putrefaction. How manifold are thy works, O Lord! In wisdom hast thou made them all. Yonder sea great and wide, therein are creeping things, innumerable living creatures. And the psalmist mentions here the creatures formed in the sea, and those which are produced through putrefaction, which have not the power to reproduce their own species, as it is clear from the closing words. Thou withdrawest their breath, they perish and return to the dust, and thou sendest forth thy spirit, they are created, and thou renewest the face of the earth. Such expressions do not apply to creatures which are born of the unions of male and female, and to be created after returning to the dust. Can they refer to those who are produced through putrefaction? The reason he says in the beginning, "How manifold are thy works, O Lord, in the wisdom hast thou created them all," is to indicate that the wisdom and excellence of an agent are shown that he endows with perfection in our very inferior material, such as the material of those animals, creatures arising from putrefaction, which God has endowed and with perfection of life. This shows wisdom of the Maker. This is the reason why he adds, "May the glory of the Lord endure forever. Let the Lord rejoice in his works," to indicate that even these low creatures arising from putrefaction are the cause of God's joy. He rejoices in them because they are his work and make known his wisdom. The rabbis too allude to the same thing in Perek Shira when they ask, "What do the creeping things say?" And they reply, "May the glory of the Lord endure forever. Let the Lord rejoice in his works." The meaning is that though it might be not becoming to God's dignity and his excellence and perfection to rejoice in such inferior creatures, nevertheless we may speak metaphorically of his rejoicing in them, because they are his works. And the meaning of "may the glory of the Lord endure forever" is that without slighting in any way God's glory, which is eternal, we may say that nevertheless that these creatures, born of putrefaction, low and insignificant as they are, having no permanence either as a species or as individuals, give God cause for rejoicing because his wisdom is seen in them, and which are his works. As we have explained in the psalmist's praise in the Psalms as the maker of existing things, and two ways in which the excellence of the Maker is seen, and it is in this way alone that we know the existence of God, and it is the maker of existing things, not from his quiddity. This is why the Torah begins with the account of creation, showing the existence of God, the author of existing things, as we, with account of creation, showing the existence of God, the author of existing things, as we explained in Book 1. Please see the previous videos on Book 1. This is the way that we must understand the existence of God as a fundamental principle. And here ends the first chapter of Book 2 by Rabbi Joseph Albo in his Sefer Ikkarim. And Bezrat Hashem, we will continue going through every single chapter. There are many chapters of Rabbi Joseph Albo's book, which helps to illuminate us of his way of thinking regarding how he puts the fundamental principles of Judaism in his mind, and later on gives it over to his students. So stay tuned and continue with us as we will continue the lectures and study of Rabbi Joseph Albo's book of Sefer Ikkarim. And thank you for being with us. This is Rabbi Moshe Otero, and like always, I always say, be part of what we're doing, join the ways of Israel, and contribute to helping us be able to reach more and more people with these teachings. Shalom, shalom, and may God richly bless you in this morning and in this week as we're looking forward and preparing for Purim. Shalom.